I never should have come to Louisiana. That thought pounds through my skull even now, months after I fled that accursed place. As I sit here in my Boston study with trembling hands, trying to commit this tale to paper before the madness takes me completely. The physicians say it's fever, swamp sickness from my time in the bayou. But I know better. I've seen what crawls beneath the skin of the Carver family, and that knowledge has poisoned me more thoroughly than any disease ever could. My name is Theodore Blackwood, and I am, though I can barely claim the title anymore, a physician specializing in rare blood disorders. In the spring of 1852, I received a letter that would damn me. It came from one Jeremiah Carver, master of the Belafonte plantation, located deep in the Louisiana marshlands, 40 miles from New Orleans. The letter was brief but intriguing. His family suffered from a hereditary condition that had baffled every doctor from Charleston to Mobile. Would I come? The compensation would be generous, enough to fund my research for years. I should have wondered why he needed to reach all the way to Boston for help. The journey south was uneventful until I reached Louisiana. From New Orleans, I hired a guide, a Creole man named Baptiste who spoke little English but knew the waterways like the lines on his palm. As we pulled deeper into the swamp, the civilized world fell away behind us. The cypress trees grew thick and twisted, their branches draped with Spanish moss that hung like funeral shrouds. The water turned black as oil, reflecting nothing, swallowing light. Baptiste grew increasingly agitated as we traveled. On the second day, he began muttering prayers under his breath, fingering a small wooden cross. When I asked what troubled him, he only shook his head and pulled faster. "Les maudits," he whispered once when he thought I wasn't listening. "The cursed ones." We reached Belafonte as the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of old blood. The plantation house rose from the swamp like something that had clawed its way up from beneath the earth. 3 stories of once white would now gray with rot and neglect. The windows were dark, covered with heavy curtains, and the air around the place felt thick, oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was diseased. Baptiste refused to go further than the dock. He practically threw my bags onto the weathered boards and pushed off without waiting for payment. I called after him, but he never looked back, disappearing into the maze of waterways as darkness fell. Standing alone on that dock, medical bag in hand, I felt the first genuine flutter of fear. The house seemed to breathe, to pulse with some inner life. But I was a man of science, I told myself. There was nothing here that rational thought couldn't explain. How wrong I was. A figure emerged from the shadows of the porch, tall, gaunt, dressed in clothes that might have been fashionable 20 years ago. As he drew closer, I could make out his features in the dying light. Sharp cheekbones, hollow cheeks, and eyes so pale they seemed almost colorless. But it was his hands that made me take an involuntary step backward. Even in the twilight, I could see the dark lines running beneath his pale skin. His veins, black as ink, creating an intricate web across his hands and up his arms, disappearing beneath his sleeves. "Dr. Blackwood," he said, and his voice was like wind through a crypt. "I am Jeremiah Carver. Welcome to Belafonte." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. His skin was cold, far too cold for the humid Louisiana evening, and I could feel something beneath it, a wrongness in the very texture of his flesh, as if something moved just below the surface. "You must be tired from your journey," he continued, releasing my hand. "Come, we've prepared a room for you. Dinner will be served shortly, and you can meet the family." I followed him into the house, and the moment I crossed that threshold, I felt it. A presence ancient and hungry that seemed to recognize me, to mark me. The air inside was cooler but somehow more oppressive than outside. The walls were covered in portraits, generations of carvers staring down with those same pale eyes. And in every painting, if you looked closely, you could see it. The subtle darkness at their necks, the hint of black beneath pale skin. "The condition," I said, trying to maintain my professional composure. "How long has your family suffered from it?" Jeremiah paused at the foot of a grand staircase, its banister carved with strange symbols I didn't recognize. "Suffered." He turned to look at me, and in the lamplight, his veins seemed to pulse with dark life. That's an interesting choice of words, Doctor. We have been blessed with this mark for 7 generations. Since my ancestor, Aldrich Carver, first came to Louisiana. And the symptoms? A smile played at the corners of his mouth, but there was no warmth in it. You'll see soon enough. My children are particularly pronounced in their presentation. It's why we sought someone of your expertise. As we climbed the stairs, each step creaking ominously beneath our feet, I noticed the family portraits grew stranger the higher we went. The black veins became more prominent, the faces more gaunt, the eyes more hollow. And in the newest paintings, the ones that must have been done within the last decade, the subjects barely looked human at all. Tell me, Doctor, Jeremiah said as we reached the landing. What do you know of hereditary curses? I'm a man of science, Mr. Carver. I don't believe in curses. He laughed then, a sound like breaking glass. No, I suppose you don't. Not yet. The dining room at Belafonte was a study in decayed grandeur. A massive table of dark wood dominated the space, set with china so fine it was nearly translucent and silver that had been polished until it gleamed like mirror. Candelabras cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the portraits of dead carvers seem to shift and watch. But it was the living carvers that truly unsettled me. They filed in one by one, each more disturbing than the last. First came Jeremiah's wife, Constance, a woman who might have been beautiful if not for the network of black veins that crawled up her neck like strangling vines, disappearing into her elaborately styled dark hair. She moved with an unnatural grace, as if she floated rather than walked, and when she smiled at me, I noticed her teeth were slightly pointed, like a predator's. Dr. Blackwood, she purred, extending a hand heavy with rings. How good of you to come all this way. Her skin, like her husband's, was corpse-cold, and when she touched me, I felt that same wrongness, that sense of something alien moving beneath the surface. Next came the children, and my God, the children were worse. The eldest, a son named Marcus, perhaps 17, had veins so dark and prominent they looked like tattoos carved into his flesh. But it was the way they moved, pulsing with his heartbeat, writhing when he turned his head, that made my stomach turn. His younger sister, Evangeline, couldn't have been more than 14, and her condition was even more pronounced. The black veins had spread to her face, creating dark branches across her cheeks, and her eyes had black flecks in the irises, like drops of ink in milk. The youngest, a boy of perhaps 10 named Lucian, was the worst of all. His veins were so dark and swollen they distorted his features, and his skin had taken on a grayish pallor. He didn't speak during dinner, just stared at me with those terrible eyes, watching me like a cat watches a mouse. You must forgive our appearance, Constance said as we took our seats. The condition tends to progress with each generation. Has it always been visual? I asked, trying to maintain clinical detachment even as my hands trembled slightly. The presentation of the veins? Oh, it's much more than visual, Jeremiah said, carving what appeared to be some kind of game meat. The knife sliced through with disturbing ease, and blood, too dark to be normal, pooled on the platter. The changes run much deeper than skin. As if to demonstrate, Marcus reached for his wine glass, and I watched in fascinated horror as his hand moved too quickly, too fluidly, like liquid given form. He noticed my stare and smiled, revealing teeth that were definitely sharper than they should be. We're stronger than we appear, he said, and to prove it, he took the silver fork in his hand and bent it effortlessly into a perfect circle. Faster, too. Would you like to see? Before I could respond, he flowed from his chair to the window and back in less than a second. One moment he was seated, the next standing by the heavy curtains, and then seated again, all while I was still drawing breath to speak. Remarkable, I heard myself say, though my mind screamed that this was impossible, unnatural, wrong. The blood is different, Evangeline added, her voice melodious but somehow discordant, like a harmony that doesn't quite resolve. Would you like to examine it, Doctor? Isn't that why you're here? I nodded, unable to trust my voice. This was beyond any medical condition I'd encountered. The way they moved, the changes to their physiology, it defied everything I knew about human anatomy. After dinner, Jeremiah said firmly, first you should know our history, the true history. He stood and walked to a portrait I hadn't noticed before, older than the others, painted in a style that seemed almost primitive. It showed a man in Puritan dress, but his face was obscured, scratched out as if by claws. Aldrich Carver, Jeremiah began, came to Louisiana in 1682, fleeing Massachusetts after certain accusations. He was learned in ways that the Puritans called witchcraft, though he preferred to think of it as natural philosophy. He sought something in these swamps, something the native peoples had hidden away. The natives wouldn't guide him, Constance continued, taking up the tale with practiced ease. They warned him that some things were buried for good reason, but Aldrich was persistent. He went into the deep swamp alone and was gone for 13 days. When he returned, Marcus said, his black-veined face eager in the candlelight, he had changed. The veins had already begun to darken, but he had also found what he sought, a way to transcend human limitation. At a price, little Lucian spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying perfectly. Everything has a price. The room fell silent, and in that silence I heard it. A sound like a heartbeat, but wrong, too slow and too deep, seeming to come from the very walls of the house. What did he find? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Jeremiah smiled that cold smile again. Come, doctor. Let me show you the source of our blessing. Let me show you what lies beneath Belafonte. He stood, and the family rose with him as one, moving in perfect synchronization. As I followed them from the dining room, I noticed that their shadows on the wall didn't quite match their movements, lagging behind slightly as if reluctant to follow. We descended through the house, past the ground floor and into a cellar I hadn't known existed. The walls here were older than the house above, made of stone that sweated moisture and was covered in those same strange symbols I'd seen on the banister. The air grew thicker, older, and that wrong heartbeat grew louder. Your medical expertise, Jeremiah said as we descended deeper still, into subcellars that couldn't possibly exist. The water table was too high in the swamp for such construction. Is not why we brought you here, doctor. My blood ran cold. Then why? The blood calls to blood, Evangeline said sweetly. And we need fresh blood, untainted blood. You see, Constance explained as we reached a heavy iron door marked with symbols that hurt to look at. The change cannot be passed to those already born. It must be introduced to a bloodline. A new bloodline. Jeremiah produced an ancient key and fitted it into the lock. You, doctor, with your fine northern breeding, your untouched genetics, you're perfect. The door swung open, and what I saw beyond defied all reason, all sanity. But I would not understand the full horror of it until later. For now, all I could do was stare into that writhing darkness and feel my mind begin to crack like ice under spring sun. Beyond that iron door lay a chamber that shouldn't exist. The walls curved impossibly, defying geometry, creating a space that seemed both vast and crushingly small simultaneously. The stone here was different, black, volcanic glass that reflected our candles in thousands of fractured images. But it was what occupied the center of that chamber that stole my breath and very nearly my sanity. At first, I thought it was a pool of that black water so common in the bayou. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized the surface wasn't still. It moved with purpose, with intelligence. It pulsed with that wrong heartbeat I'd been hearing, and within its depths, things shifted and coiled. Things that might have been tentacles or veins or something between the two. Beautiful, isn't it? Jeremiah said, moving to stand at the pool's edge. The black liquid, for I refused to think of it as alive, not yet, responded to his presence, reaching up in small tendrils that caressed his hand like a devoted pet. What in God's name is it? I whispered. Older than God, Marcus said, his young face terrible in its ecstasy. Older than names. The natives called it the heart of the swamp, but even they didn't know its true nature. It has slept here since before human memory, feeding on the marshland, growing, waiting. Aldrich found it, Constance continued, kneeling beside the pool. The darkness reached for her too, and where it touched her skin, her black veins pulsed in response. He made a bargain. It would share its power, its immortality, if he fed it. If he gave it access to the world above. Fed it? I took an involuntary step backward, only to find Evangeline and Lucian blocking the doorway behind me. Despite their youth, I knew with terrible certainty that they could stop me if I tried to flee. Knowledge at first, Jeremiah said. Aldrich fed it stories, histories, languages. It was so hungry for understanding of the world that had grown while it slept. But eventually it wanted more. It wanted to experience, to feel, to live through us. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the full horror of his arm. The black veins weren't veins at all. They were extensions of the thing in the pool, parasitic tendrils that had burrowed into his flesh and made him both more and less than human. Each generation, the connection grows stronger, he explained with the detached tone of a lecturer. Each child born to our line emerges already joined to it. We are becoming something new, Doctor. Something magnificent. You're becoming monsters, I said, finding my voice at last. Monsters? Evangeline laughed, a sound like breaking bells. We don't age as others do. We don't sicken. We are stronger, faster, more than human. Is that monstrous? Or is it evolution? But the price? Little Lucian said again, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Fear? Regret? Tell him about the price, Father. Jeremiah's expression darkened. Everything has a price, yes. The connection goes both ways. As we draw on its power, it draws on our humanity. Each generation is born less human than the last. Eventually we will be vessels, Marcus finished, his voice dreamy. Perfect vessels for it to inhabit fully, to walk the world in our skins. And you want me to, what? Marry into your family? Produce another generation of these abominations? The words burst from me before I could stop them. Oh no, Doctor, Constance said, rising gracefully. That process takes generations. We have something much more immediate in mind. They began to circle me, moving with that liquid grace, and I realized with mounting horror that I was trapped. The thing in the pool began to churn more violently, sensing fresh prey. You see, Jeremiah explained, while the generational transformation is slow, there is another way, a direct introduction. The ancient texts Aldrich left speak of it, a baptism in the heart's essence. It's never been attempted on an adult, but your medical knowledge combined with our connection, we believe you could survive it. Change, but survive. You're mad, I said, though the words felt hollow. Mad or not, they clearly intended to go through with this. The process is already beginning, Evangeline said softly, and I noticed then what I should have seen before. A sweet, cloying scent in the air, like rotting flowers. My head began to swim. The spores in the air. They're preparing your body, making it receptive. I felt it then. A tingling in my extremities, a warmth spreading through my veins. Not painful but wrong, alien. I looked at my hands and watched in horror as the veins began to darken. Just slightly, but enough to know that something was happening to me. No, I gasped, stumbling backward. No, you can't. It's for the greater good, Doctor, Jeremiah said, approaching slowly. Think of what you could learn, studying the transformation from within. Think of the papers you could write, the advances in medicine. You came here seeking knowledge of a rare blood disorder. We're offering you so much more. The thing in the pool reached out, and I felt it calling to me. Not in words, but in feelings, in promises. Immortality, power, knowledge beyond human comprehension. All I had to do was surrender, let it in, become one with something greater than myself. But beneath those promises, I felt its true nature. Hunger without end, intelligence without compassion, existence without soul. It was a thing that had never been human and never could be, trying to understand humanity by consuming it, hollowing people out and wearing them like masks. I won't, I said, though my voice shook. I won't let you do this. I'm afraid you don't have a choice, Jeremiah said sadly. You see, Doctor, the moment you entered Belafonte, you became part of this. The house itself is connected to the heart. Every breath you've taken, every surface you've touched, you've been absorbing its influence. Even if you left now, the change would continue. Slower, perhaps, but inevitable. You're lying, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew he wasn't. I could feel it, that alien presence in my blood, weak but growing stronger. There are two options, Constance said, her voice almost maternal. Submit to the baptism, let us guide the transformation, and maintain some semblance of yourself. Or resist and let the change happen randomly, uncontrolled. Those who change without guidance, well, they don't retain much humanity at all. As if to emphasize her point, something moved in the shadows at the far end of the chamber. Something that might once have been human but was now a writhing mass of black veins and pale flesh, mewling softly in the darkness. Uncle Theodore, Evangeline said brightly. He was the last doctor we brought here. He chose to resist. My knees nearly buckled. The thing in the shadows, that barely human mass of corruption, had been a man like me, a physician who had come to help and found only horror. How many? I asked. How many doctors have you lured here? You're the seventh, Lucian said quietly. Lucky number 7. The others began to close in, and the thing in the pool stretched toward me, eager, hungry. I had perhaps seconds to make a choice. Submit and hope to retain enough of myself to find escape later, or resist and become like the thing mewling in the shadows. But then, in that moment of absolute terror, I remembered something. My medical bag, still clutched in my white-knuckled grip, and in that bag sulfuric acid I'd brought for my experiments. It wasn't much, but perhaps— Very well, I said, letting my shoulders slump in defeat. I submit, but please, let me prepare myself. My medical bag, there are sedatives that might make the process easier. Jeremiah studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Of course, doctor. We're not barbarians. Take what you need. I knelt, opening my bag with trembling fingers, knowing I would have only one chance at this. The family watched, confident in their power, certain of their victory. They had no idea what a desperate man was capable of. My fingers found the glass vial of sulfuric acid, carefully wrapped in cloth to prevent breakage during travel. The Carvers watched me with those terrible eyes, patient as spiders, certain their prey was already ensnared. The thing in the pool churned eagerly, sending up tendrils that swayed like cobra heads, tasting the air, tasting my fear. Laudanum, I lied, holding up the vial. For the pain. There is no pain, Marcus said, his black-veined face eager. Only transformation, only becoming. I uncorked the vial, and the sharp chemical scent cut through the cloying sweetness of the spores. Jeremiah's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew something was wrong, but before he could speak, I acted. I flung the acid not at them, but at the thing in the pool. The reaction was immediate and violent. Where the acid struck, the black substance recoiled with a sound I'll never forget, like 1,000 voices screaming underwater. Steam rose from the pool's surface, and the entire chamber shuddered. The Carvers cried out in unison, clutching their heads, their black veins pulsing erratically. What have you done? Jeremiah roared, but his voice was distorted, multiplied, as if the thing in the pool spoke through him. I didn't waste time answering. I ran. Behind me, I heard them recovering, heard their inhuman movements as they gave chase. But the acid had done more than hurt the creature. It had disrupted their connection to it, made their movements jerky, uncoordinated. I had moments, maybe less. I burst through the iron door and up the stone steps, taking them 3 at a time. My lungs burned, and I could feel that wrongness in my blood growing stronger, responding to the creature's distress. My own veins were darkening before my eyes, but I couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. I reached the main floor just as they recovered enough to truly pursue. I could hear them below. Not footsteps, but something worse, a liquid rushing sound, as if they no longer maintained fully human form. I grabbed an oil lamp from a table and hurled it at the cellar door. The glass shattered, spreading burning oil across the old wood. It wouldn't stop them, but it might slow them. I ran for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Sealed, somehow, though I could see no lock. The windows were the same, covered with that black substance that pulsed from within. The house itself had become part of the creature, a trap of wood and glass and corrupted life. "You cannot leave, Doctor." Constance's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "You are part of us now. Part of it." I felt the truth of her words. The darkening veins in my hands were spreading up my arms. I could feel my pulse sinking with that wrong heartbeat, feel my thoughts becoming less my own. But I was a physician trained to think clearly even in crisis. If I couldn't flee, I had to fight. The laboratory, Jeremiah had mentioned a laboratory where Aldrich had conducted his experiments. If I could find his notes, perhaps there was something about reversing the process or at least stopping it. I ran up the stairs, my contaminated blood seeming to guide me. I could feel the house's layout in my mind now, knew instinctively where to go. The laboratory was on the 3rd floor, behind a door marked with those eye-watering symbols. Inside was a treasure trove of madness. Tables covered with glass containers holding preserved specimens. Things that might once have been human organs but were now twisted, black-veined monstrosities. Books bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin. And at the center, a journal, Aldrich's journal. I grabbed it, flipping through pages of cramped handwriting, diagrams that hurt to look at, formulas that made no scientific sense yet somehow felt correct to my corrupted mind. And there, near the end, I found what I needed, the severance. Aldrich had considered the possibility that the connection might need to be broken. He developed a process, painful, dangerous, but possible. It required 3 things: salt from the Dead Sea, which he'd kept in a sealed jar, blood from an untainted human, which I barely still was, and most crucially, a piece of the heart itself, willingly given. That last part seemed impossible, but as I read further, I understood. The creature was not evil in the traditional sense. It was alien, operating on imperatives we couldn't understand. But it was also curious, eager to experience. It might give a piece of itself if offered something in return. I heard them on the stairs, no longer trying to move quietly, their forms scratching and squelching against the walls. I had minutes at most. I found the salt, mixed it with my blood, still red, though darkening by the moment, and prepared the ritual as Aldrich had written it. But I needed that piece of the heart, and for that I would have to face them again. They burst through the door, no longer entirely human. Jeremiah's form writhed, his body elongating and contracting like a massive leech. Constance moved on too many limbs, her face split into a vertical maw lined with black teeth. The children were worse, their young bodies more malleable, twisted into shapes that violated every law of anatomy. "You cannot escape what you are becoming," Jeremiah gurgled through his transformed throat. "I'm not trying to escape," I said, holding up the mixture. "I'm offering a trade." They paused, confused. Behind them, seeping through the walls themselves, came tendrils of the heart, the creature's consciousness extending through its infected hosts. "I've seen Aldrich's notes," I continued, my voice steadier than I felt. "He theorized about what you truly want, not just to consume but to understand, to truly experience human emotion, human thought, without the filter of your possessed vessels." The tendrils swayed, listening. "I offer you my memories," I said. "My medical knowledge, my experiences, my emotions, all of them, freely given. Not taken through corruption, but offered in true human fashion. A gift. In exchange, give me a piece of yourself and let me go." The room fell silent except for that omnipresent wrong heartbeat. The Carvers stood frozen, their twisted forms waiting on their master's decision. I could feel the creature's ancient intelligence considering, weighing the offer. It had fed on humans for generations, but always through force, through corruption. Never had someone offered themselves freely, partially. A tendril separated from the mass, approaching me slowly. Where it touched my hand, I felt its consciousness. Vast, alien, lonely. It had existed since before life crawled from the seas, watching the world change, unable to truly participate except through its corrupted vessels. My offer was something new, something it had never experienced. The exchange was agony. As my memories flowed into it, I experienced them all simultaneously. Every moment of my life compressed into a single, burning instant. But with them went some of the corruption, the darkness retreating from my veins as the creature took what it wanted directly rather than through infection. When it ended, I held a piece of the heart in my hand. A black, pulsing thing the size of a human heart but with too many chambers, too many vessels. The Carvers howled in rage and pain, their connection to their master temporarily severed by its voluntary separation of a piece of itself. I didn't waste the opportunity. I completed Aldrich's ritual, speaking words in a language that predated human speech, words that my corrupted blood somehow knew. The piece of the heart dissolved into the mixture, creating something that glowed with sickly light. I drank it all. The pain was beyond description. Every cell in my body screamed as the corruption was ripped from my blood, forced out through my pores in black, stinking sweat. I fell to my knees, convulsing, certain I would die. But slowly, agonizingly, I felt the connection break. My veins lightened, my thoughts cleared, and that wrong heartbeat faded from my consciousness. When I could stand again, the Carvers had fled, unable to bear the psychic backlash of the severance. The house itself seemed to recoil from me, the black substance retreating from the windows and doors. I was free, or as free as I could be. But I knew it was temporary. The creature had a taste of me now, knew my thoughts, my fears, my weaknesses, and the Carvers would recover, would continue their terrible evolution toward becoming perfect vessels for their master. I grabbed Aldrich's journal and what supplies I could carry, then fled into the swamp. Behind me, Belafonte began to collapse, the house unable to maintain its structure without the constant flow of corrupted life. But I could hear them in the ruins, calling after me, promising that this wasn't over. They were right. It was only the beginning. The swamp had become a labyrinth of horror. Without Baptiste's guidance, I was lost within hours, stumbling through black water and grasping vines. The journal and samples clutched against my chest wrapped in oilcloth. Every shadow could hide the Carvers. Every ripple in the water might herald their approach. I had been free of the corruption for less than a day when I heard them hunting me. It started with the birds. They fell silent all at once, a wave of quiet spreading through the bayou like death itself. Then came the sound of something large moving through the water, not swimming but walking along the bottom, disturbing centuries of sediment. The stench followed, that sweet wrought-eyed smelled in the chamber, but stronger now, mixed with the copper tang of blood. I pressed myself against a massive cypress trunk, trying to control my breathing. Through the hanging moss I saw Marcus first, or what Marcus had become. His transformation had accelerated after the severance. His body was elongated, stretched like taffy, allowing him to move through the trees like a serpent. His face had split into 4 sections, each capable of independent movement, and his black veins had burst through his skin in places, writhing in the air like external arteries. "Doctor," he called, his voice echoing from all 4 mouthparts. "The master wants its memories back. You stole from it. That wasn't part of the bargain." I held my breath as he passed within feet of my hiding spot, those terrible split faces scanning in different directions. Behind him came Evangeline, crawling along the tree branches overhead. She had become something spider-like. Her limbs multiplied and bent at impossible angles. Her hair transformed into sensing tendrils that tasted the air. "We can smell your fear, Doctor," she sang, her voice still melodious despite coming from a throat that was no longer human. "Your sweat, your blood, still mostly pure but not entirely. You'll never be completely clean again." She was right. Despite the severance, I could feel traces of the corruption in my blood, dormant but present, like a disease in remission. The ritual had saved me from transformation, but some changes were permanent. My vision was sharper than before, especially in darkness. I could sense living things by their heartbeats, feel the pulse of life in the swamp around me. And worst of all, I could still hear it, the heart calling to me, whispering promises and threats in equal measure. I waited until they passed, then moved in the opposite direction, deeper into the swamp. I needed to find the river, follow it to civilization, but every path looked the same in this green hell. The sun was a dim memory above the canopy, offering no guidance. I was relying on instinct, and my instincts were no longer entirely human. By nightfall, I found temporary shelter in a hunting shack, long abandoned and half-collapsed but dry inside. I risked a small fire to read more of Aldrich's journal hoping to find something that might help me survive. The entries toward the end were increasingly deranged, but one passage caught my attention. The heart is not alone. Throughout the world, there are others like it, sleeping things from before history waiting to wake, to consume, to transform. The heart speaks to them in dreams, coordinating, planning. What we've done here at Belafonte is just the beginning. When enough vessels are prepared, when enough bloodlines are corrupted, they will all wake at once. The world will drown in black veins. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. This was bigger than one corrupted family, bigger than one monster in a swamp. This was a threat to all humanity, and I was possibly the only person who knew about it and remained free enough to act. A sound outside made me extinguish the fire immediately. Footsteps, human footsteps, but wrong, too heavy, as if the person walking carried tremendous weight. Through a crack in the wall, I saw Jeremiah approach. He hadn't transformed as dramatically as his children, but the changes were perhaps more disturbing for their subtlety. His skin had taken on a black sheen like oil over pale flesh. His veins pulsed with their own rhythm, independent of any heartbeat. And his eyes had gone completely black, reflecting no light, seeming to pull illumination from the air around them. "I know you're in there, Theodore," he said conversationally, as if we were still in his dining room. "There's no point in hiding. We're connected, you and I. The heart shared your memories with us before you severed the link. I know how you think, what you fear, where you would run." I remained silent, hoping against hope that he was bluffing. "You're wondering if you can kill us," he continued, beginning to circle the shack. "You're thinking about fire, about acid, about all the ways a physician knows to destroy tissue. But we're not tissue anymore, not entirely. We're something between flesh and possibility, matter and void. You could burn this entire swamp and we would simply retreat into the heart, wait, and emerge again." "Then why hunt me?" I called out, abandoning stealth. "If I can't truly harm you, why do you care if I escape?" "Because you carry our secrets," he replied, his black eyes finding mine through the crack. "Because you know the truth, and because the heart is curious about something you resisted. No one has ever resisted after being so thoroughly infected. It wants to understand how. It wants to study you, dissect you, learn from you." "So I'm to be a specimen?" "You're to be a teacher," he corrected. "Willing or not." He moved then, faster than anything that size should move. The wall of the shack exploded inward, and I barely rolled aside in time. I grabbed a burning branch from the dying fire and swung it at him. He caught it easily, the flames not even singing his corrupted skin, and crushed it to ash in his grip. "The children are positioning themselves around us," he said calmly. "Constance is sealing the paths. There's nowhere to run, Doctor. Submit, and I promise your consciousness will remain intact enough to appreciate what you become." But I had one advantage, those traces of corruption in my blood, the ones that would never fully leave. They let me sense what Jeremiah couldn't, something else approaching through the swamp, something that wasn't part of their family. It was Baptiste. The Creole guide emerged from the darkness like a ghost, holding a shotgun loaded with something that gleamed white in the moonlight. Salt rounds, blessed by priests in New Orleans. He fired without hesitation, striking Jeremiah in the chest. The salt didn't wound him physically, but the blessed nature of it disrupted his connection to the heart. He screamed, that multitonal shriek of something not quite human, and stumbled backward. "Run, Doctor!" Baptiste shouted, firing again. "The river, half a mile north. My boat!" I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed the journal and ran, crashing through the underbrush as Baptiste's gunfire echoed behind me. I could hear the children converging on his position, hear Constance's inhuman wail of rage. The river appeared like salvation, and there was Baptiste's narrow boat tied to a dead tree. But as I reached for the rope, a hand, if it could still be called that, burst from the water and seized my ankle. Lucien rose from the depths, his child's body twisted into something amphibious, gills fluttering where his neck should be, his mouth a circular maw of teeth. "The master wants you back," he gurgled, pulling me toward the water. I grabbed Aldrich's journal and struck him with it. Where the corrupted leather cover touched his transformed flesh, it sizzled and burned. He released me with a shriek, retreating into the black water. Of course, the journal had been soaked in the heart's essence for decades, then used in the severance ritual. It was both corrupted and purified, poisoned to things like what the Carvers had become. I leaped into the boat and pulled frantically into the current. Behind me, Baptiste's gunfire had stopped, but I couldn't think about what that meant. I could only flee, following the river toward New Orleans, toward civilization, toward help I wasn't sure existed. But I wasn't alone on the river. In the water around me, I could see them, dark shapes pacing the boat, waiting for me to tire, to make a mistake. And worse, I could feel the heart reaching out through the water itself, its influence spreading like oil through the swamp's veins. "You'll come back," Jeremiah's voice carried across the water, though I couldn't see him. "They always come back. The corruption in your blood will call to you, pull you home. And when you return, we'll be waiting. We have all the time in the world." I pulled harder, but I knew he was right about one thing: the corruption in my blood was permanent. I would never be fully free of the heart's influence. Even now, I could feel it trying to whisper to me, to show me visions of what I could become if I just surrendered. Dawn came like a miracle, and with it, the sounds of pursuit faded. They couldn't follow me into the daylight. Not yet. Their transformations had made them creatures of darkness, at least for now. But I knew that would change. Each generation became stronger, more capable of existing in the world above. I reached the outskirts of New Orleans by noon, abandoning Baptiste's boat and stumbling into the city on foot. But even among the crowds, I didn't feel safe. Every shadow could hide them, every person might be corrupted. The heart had been feeding for 7 generations. How far had its influence spread? How many other families had been touched by its black veins? I had to find help, had to warn someone. But who would believe me? And more importantly, who could I trust? That's when I saw her. A woman in a small herb shop, grinding something with a mortar and pestle. She looked up as I passed, and her eyes widened. She could see it, the traces of corruption in me, the shadow that would never leave. "Mon Dieu," she whispered. "You've been touched by the old thing in the swamp. You know about it?" I gasped. She nodded gravely. "My grandmother knew. She tried to warn the Carvers generations ago. Come inside, quickly. If you've escaped them, they'll be hunting you. And if the heart has marked you," she shuddered, "you'll need more than medicine to survive what's coming." I write this now from my study in Boston, 6 months after my escape from Louisiana. My hands shake not from fear but from the advancing corruption. Despite all my efforts, it grows stronger each day. The veins in my arms have begun to darken. Soon I will be like them. This account is my warning to whoever finds it. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it truly ended. After fleeing the church, I wandered New Orleans in a daze. The city transformed into a nightmare. The black liquid that had seeped from the church floor was spreading through the streets like living tar, and where it touched, things changed. Street lamps bent into organic shapes. Cobblestones pulsed like hearts. And the people, those who weren't already corrupted, fled screaming or stood transfixed, watching their city become something alien. I found refuge with Marie's contacts, a secret society calling themselves the Order of St. Lazarus. They operated from the basement of a cathedral, 12 men and women who had dedicated their lives to fighting the corruption. Their leader, Father Benedict, was a man whose faith had been tested and transformed by knowledge of the things that lurked beneath reality. Marie sent word before she died. he told me, his eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights. She said you had Aldrich's journal, that you knew the truth about the hearts. The journal is destroyed, I admitted. But I remember most of it, and I know what's coming. They listened in horror as I described the convergence, the awakening of the hearts worldwide. Some wept, others prayed, but Father Benedict simply nodded, as if he had expected this. Then we must accelerate our plans, he said. If we cannot prevent the awakening, perhaps we can corrupt their corruption. He showed me their work, years of research combining religious texts, occult knowledge, and scientific theory. They had discovered something remarkable. The hearts were not invulnerable. They were ancient, powerful, but they had a weakness. They needed believers, willing vessels. Force a connection, and it became unstable. Poison the bloodline with something antithetical to their nature, and the whole system could collapse. We've been developing a counterinfection, Father Benedict explained, showing me vials of silvery liquid that seemed to move with its own light. A blessing made manifest, you might say. It spreads like the corruption but carries the opposite intent. Not consumption but sacrifice. Not unity but individuality. You want to infect the infected, I said, understanding dawning. We want to free them, or failing that, destroy the vessels before they can complete their transformation. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all we had left. Over the next 3 days, as New Orleans descended into chaos, we prepared. The order had members throughout the city, and they reported the corruption's spread. The Carvers had emerged from Belafonte, no longer hiding their true nature. They walked openly through the streets, gathering the corrupted to them, preparing for something. On the 4th night, we learned what. A member of the order, a young woman named Catherine, burst into our sanctuary, her clothes torn, her eyes wide with terror. The cathedral, she gasped. St. Louis Cathedral. They're gathering there. All of them. Every corrupted family in Louisiana. They're going to perform a mass baptism, corrupt the entire city at once. Father Benedict closed his eyes in prayer, then opened them with grim determination. Then we make our stand there. Tonight we end this one way or another. We armed ourselves with the counterinfection, with blessed salt, with symbols and words that had power against the old things. 12 of us against hundreds of corrupted. It was suicide, but what choice did we have? The cathedral was unrecognizable when we arrived. Black veins covered its walls like ivy, pulsing with that wrong heartbeat. The doors stood open, and from within came a sound that wasn't quite singing, wasn't quite screaming, the corrupted celebrating their ascension. Inside was madness. The pews had been pushed aside to make room for a pool of that black liquid. Not just a pool, an extension of the heart itself, brought up from beneath Belafonte through underground channels that should not exist. The corrupted families stood around it, their bodies in various stages of transformation. Some still looked mostly human. Others had become things that violated every law of nature. And at the center, by the altar, stood the Carvers. Jeremiah had completed his transformation. He was no longer remotely human, but a pillar of writhing black veins in a vaguely man-like shape. His wife had become something ethereal, translucent, her corrupted blood visible through skin like rice paper. The children, I cannot describe what the children had become. My mind refuses to hold their images. Welcome, Doctor. Jeremiah's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. You're just in time for the culmination. When the bell strikes midnight, the hearts will fully wake. The vessels will be filled. And humanity will evolve. Humanity will die, Father Benedict said, stepping forward. You're not evolution. You're extinction. Semantics? Constance laughed, her voice like wind chimes made of bone. Death, rebirth, transformation, all the same to entities that exist outside time. Father Benedict raised his vial of counterinfection. Then let's see how your masters react to this. He threw it into the pool. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The black liquid recoiled, steam rising from where the silver liquid spread. The corrupted screamed in unison, clutching their heads, their black veins pulsing erratically. Some fell to their knees, vomiting black bile. Others began to transform rapidly, uncontrollably, their bodies unable to maintain cohesion. "Now!" Father Benedict shouted, and we attacked. What followed was not a battle but a massacre on both sides. The corrupted, despite their pain, were still stronger, faster, more than human. They tore through our ranks like paper. I watched Catherine fall, her throat torn out by something that had once been a child. I saw 2 other members pulled into the pool, their screams cut short as the black liquid filled their lungs. But we fought on, throwing more vials, speaking words of power, using every tool at our disposal. And it was working. The pool was turning gray, solidifying, dying. The heart's connection to this place was weakening. That's when I saw her. Evangeline, burned but alive, crawling across the ceiling toward Father Benedict. I shouted a warning, but too late. She dropped onto him, her transformed limbs piercing through his chest. But with his dying breath, he did something I'll never forget. He smiled and pulled her into an embrace. "I forgive you, child," he whispered, and pressed his cross against her forehead. The blessed metal, combined with his genuine absolution, had an effect none of us expected. Evangeline screamed, but it wasn't pain. It was release. For a moment, just a moment, I saw her as she truly was. A young girl, terrified, trapped in a body that was no longer her own. The corruption began to retreat from her, the black veins lightening. "Help me?" she gasped, reaching toward me with a hand that was almost human again. I reached back, but Jeremiah was there, his transformed appendage wrapping around his daughter's throat. "Weakness," he hissed. "The heart does not tolerate weakness." He tore her apart. I've never screamed like I did in that moment. Not from fear or horror, but from pure rage. A child, his own child, killed for the crime of remembering her humanity. I grabbed Father Benedict's dropped cross and the remaining vials of counterinfection, and I did something insane. I dove into the pool. The black liquid engulfed me, invaded me, tried to corrupt me completely. But I had the counterinfection, and I released it all directly into the heart's extension. The 2 forces met within me, using my body as their battleground. The pain was beyond description. Every cell in my body was being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously. But something else happened. For a moment, I connected not just to this heart, but to all of them. I felt their vast network, their ancient hunger, their plan for our world. And I felt their fear. For the first time in eons, they felt fear. The counterinfection was spreading through their network, carried by my corrupted blood that connected me to them all. I saw the truth then. The hearts were not gods. They were parasites, cosmic parasites that had fed on countless worlds before ours. But they had never encountered something like humanity's capacity for sacrifice, for choosing death over corruption. The counterinfection carried that essence, the human ability to destroy oneself rather than surrender. The pool exploded outward, throwing me against the altar. The corrupted fell like puppets with cut strings, some dying instantly, others writhing as their bodies tried to remember how to be human. The Carvers collapsed, their perfect forms destabilizing. Jeremiah crawled toward me, his body falling apart, revealing the nothingness beneath. "What have you done?" he gasped, black liquid pouring from where his mouth should be. "I've given them a choice," I said, struggling to stand. "The same choice you never gave your children, humanity or oblivion." He reached for me with an appendage that was already dissolving, but before he could touch me, he collapsed into a puddle of black liquid that immediately began to evaporate. The cathedral shook, chunks of masonry falling from the ceiling. The hearts were retreating, pulling back their influence rather than risk further contamination. Around me, some of the corrupted were dying, their bodies too damaged to survive without the heart's support. Others were transforming back, slowly, painfully, remembering what it meant to be human. I stumbled from the cathedral as it collapsed behind me, the last remnant of the Order of St. Lazarus. The city was in chaos, some areas returning to normal, others permanently changed, twisted into alien landscapes that would have to be quarantined, burned, forgotten. But we had won. Hadn't we? Now, 6 months later, I know better. The hearts have retreated but not died. They wait, patient as only immortal things can be, for humanity to forget, to become complacent. The corruption spreads still, slower, more carefully, learning from its mistakes. And I am dying. The battle within me between corruption and counterinfection has left me broken, neither fully human nor corrupted. My blood is poisoned to both sides. I cannot be turned, but I cannot be cured. Each day, the black veins spread a little further. Each night, I dream of the hearts calling to me, offering me peace if I just surrender. I will not surrender. When I feel the end approaching, I have prepared a final dose of the counterinfection, modified with my own poisoned blood. I will inject it directly into my heart and let my death spread through whatever connection remains to the hearts. It may accomplish nothing, or it may give humanity another generation of freedom. To whoever finds this account, know this: the Carvers were not unique. In every city, in every country, families like them exist, breeding toward the apocalypse. Look for the signs, the black veins, the wrong movements, the sweet smell of rot. Do not trust anyone who speaks of evolution through surrender, of unity through consumption. And if you see children with black veins, remember Evangeline. Remember that inside every corrupted vessel, a human soul might still remain, screaming to be free. The sun is setting now, and my veins are almost entirely black. I can hear them calling. Not just the hearts, but the families, the corrupted, all those who have surrendered. They promise me peace, community, purpose. They promise me I won't die alone. But I would rather die human and alone than live forever as a puppet. I go now to prepare my final injection. If God is merciful, my death will mean something. If not, at least I remained myself until the end. Remember the Carvers. Remember Belafonte. Remember that humanity's greatest strength is not our ability to evolve, but our ability to choose our own destruction rather than let something else choose it for us. And if you ever find yourself in the Louisiana swamps, and you come across a plantation where the shadows move wrong and the air smells of sweet rot, run. Run and never look back, for the hearts are patient, and they are always hungry,